It was 6:47 p.m. on Thanksgiving Day. The long oak table in my mother's dining room was set for 34 people. It was the kind of table that stretched from one end of the dining room to the other. The kind you only pull out once a year when the whole family descends and fills every chair. The turkey was carved. The candles were lit. Someone had folded the cloth napkins into little fans. The house smelled like rosemary and butter and the specific warmth that comes from too many bodies in a room that isn't quite big enough. And my mother was standing up with a wine glass raised like she was about to give a speech at a corporate event. "To the family that actually matters," she said, and she smiled. 33 glasses went up. Wine caught the candlelight. Someone laughed. My sister Diane clinked her glass against my brother Patrick's. My other brother Sean was already eating. He didn't care about toasts. He cared about the sweet potato casserole. Then my mother looked at me. She didn't raise her glass higher or lower. She didn't change her expression. She just looked at me the way you might look at a piece of furniture you were thinking about replacing, and she said it clearly enough for every single person at that table to hear. "You won't get a cent from Grandma. You've never done anything for her." Nobody flinched. Nobody corrected her. 33 people sat there with their glasses still raised and not one of them said a word. I didn't say a word either. I set my napkin on the table. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. I walked out of that house at 6:49 p.m. and I didn't look back. What none of them knew, not my mother, not Diane, not Patrick, not Sean, not a single one of those 34 people at that table, was that I had been taking care of Grandma Margaret for 3 years. Every single week. Sometimes twice a week. Doctor's appointments, grocery runs, medication pickups, plumbing emergencies at 2 a.m. I had been doing it quietly and I had been doing it alone. And 11 days after that Thanksgiving dinner, Grandma Margaret died. 1 week after that, the lawyer called. And that is when everything my mother believed about our family started to fall apart. To understand what happened at that will reading, you have to understand who Margaret Callahan was. And to understand that, you have to understand our family. Grandma Margaret, everyone called her Maggie, was 78 years old when this story begins. She lived in a small colonial house on Elm Creek Road in a quiet suburb about 40 minutes outside the city. The house was paid off. Had been paid off for over 20 years. She'd lived there since before my mother was born, and before that she and my grandfather had bought it together for a price that people in our generation can barely comprehend. She was not a wealthy woman in the way most people would understand that word. She didn't drive a luxury car. She didn't wear designer clothes. She shopped at the same grocery store she'd shopped at for 40 years. She clipped coupons out of the Sunday paper even though she didn't need to. Old habits. But here's what most of my family didn't bother to find out. Grandma Maggie had been quietly, methodically investing for decades. My grandfather had been a mechanical engineer. He wasn't flashy about money. He was careful with it. When he died 12 years ago, he left Maggie with more than just the house. He left her with a retirement portfolio that had been growing untouched for over 30 years. And Maggie, sharp as a tack until the very end, had let it keep growing. None of us knew the exact number. Not even my mother. Because nobody thought to ask. And Grandma Maggie never volunteered it. My mother, Karen, was the eldest of Maggie's 3 children. She was the one who ran the family. She was the one who organized holidays, sent the group texts, made the decisions about who sat where at dinner. She was the one who decided somewhere along the line that I was the least important person in our family. I was 19 when that started. I just dropped out of community college, not because I didn't want to learn, but because I couldn't afford it and my parents wouldn't help. Diane was at a 4-year university, fully funded. My parents paid for her tuition, her apartment, her books, everything. When I asked for even a small loan to finish my degree, my father said, "We can't just give money to everyone, Claire." Diane graduated with honors. My parents threw her a party with over 60 guests. I got my GED through an online program while working 2 jobs. Nobody acknowledged it. That was the pattern. And it continued for years. By the time I was 23, I had worked my way into a stable job at a healthcare nonprofit. I wasn't making a fortune, but I was managing a small team. I was good at what I did and I was building something real. My mother still introduced me to people at family gatherings as the one who didn't finish school. As if that single fact defined everything about who I was. Diane became a marketing executive. My parents told everyone about it. Patrick became a sales manager. They were proud of that too. Sean was still figuring things out, but he was the baby, so nobody held it against him. And Claire? Claire was the disappointment. Claire was the one who couldn't get her life together. Claire was the one my mother looked at across that Thanksgiving table and dismissed in front of 34 people without a second thought. But here's the thing about Claire that nobody in that room understood. Claire was the only one who visited Grandma Maggie. It started small. I went over one Sunday about 3 years before the Thanksgiving dinner. Diane had mentioned offhand that Grandma had called her and said she felt lonely. Diane said she was busy. Patrick said he'd go sometime. Nobody went. So I did. I knocked on the door at 11 a.m. Grandma opened it in her housecoat, her hair not brushed, a look on her face like she hadn't expected anyone to actually show up. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Claire, come in. I just made coffee." That was the first Sunday. I went back the next Sunday. And the next. Within a month it was every week. I drove 40 minutes each way and I sat in her kitchen and we talked. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 3. She told me about her life, about growing up in Ireland, about meeting my grandfather at a dance hall in 1968, about raising 3 children in a house that was too small but felt enormous because of how much love was in it. And I listened. Actually listened. Not the way my mother listened, which was really just waiting for her turn to talk. I listened the way you listen to someone who has something important to say and has been waiting a long time for someone to hear it. After about 6 months I started noticing things. Small things. A light bulb in the hallway that had been out for weeks. A leak under the kitchen sink that had left a brown stain on the cabinet. A stack of medical bills on her counter that she hadn't opened. So I fixed the light bulb. I called a plumber for the sink and paid for it. I sat with her and went through the medical bills one by one, and helped her sort out what insurance would cover and what she needed to pay. She never asked me to do any of it. I just did it. And every time I did, she'd look at me with this expression. Quiet, grateful, a little surprised, like she still couldn't believe someone had bothered. "You're the only one who comes, you know," she said to me one Tuesday in March, about 2 years into my visits. It wasn't a complaint. It was just a fact. She said it the way you'd state the weather. I didn't tell her that I knew. I didn't tell her that I'd called my mother 3 times to suggest that someone else in the family visit more often. I didn't tell her that my mother had said each time, some version of "she's fine. She's old. That's what old people do." I just squeezed Grandma's hand and said, "I like coming over." And I meant it. In September, about 2 months before that Thanksgiving dinner, Grandma Maggie started declining. It wasn't sudden. It was gradual, the way these things usually are. She started forgetting small things. Where she'd put her keys. Whether she'd eaten breakfast. Once I arrived on a Tuesday and found her sitting in the living room in the dark, the TV off, staring at nothing. She didn't seem to know what day it was. I took her to her doctor the next morning. Dr. Ellen Marsh had been Grandma's physician for over 15 years. She pulled me aside after the appointment and said in a calm, clinical voice, "Mrs. Callahan is showing early signs of cognitive decline. It's not advanced, but it's there. She's going to need more support." I asked if anyone else in the family knew. Dr. Marsh looked at me carefully. "You're listed as her emergency contact, Claire. You've been attending every appointment for the last 8 months. As far as I can tell, you're the one providing her care." I had been for a while without even realizing it had become that much of my life. I was the one who refilled her prescriptions at the pharmacy on Maple Street every 3rd Thursday. I was the one who called her every single morning at 8:15 a.m., just to make sure she was up and eating. I was the one who noticed one Sunday that she had forgotten to pay her electric bill for 2 months in a row. Not because she couldn't afford it, but because the paperwork had confused her. I fixed it quietly. He never knew. And still no one else in the family had called once to ask how she was doing. I called my mother that evening. I explained what Dr. Marsh had said. I asked if Karen could come help, even just once a week, even just to sit with Grandma so I could take a break. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Claire, I have a full-time job. Diane has a full-time job. We can't all rearrange our lives because Grandma is getting old. That's what happens. She'll be fine." I called again 2 weeks later. Same answer. A little less patient. I called a 3rd time in late October, after I'd spent an entire weekend at Grandma's house because she'd gotten confused and tried to leave at 3 a.m., convinced she needed to pick up my mother from school. This time my mother didn't just dismiss me. She got frustrated. You're spending too much time there, Claire. Starting to seem weird. We have a life. Normal people don't do this. Just let her be. I hung up. I didn't call again. That was 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. 3 weeks before my mother stood up at that dinner table and told 34 people that I had never done anything for Grandma Margaret. I sat through that toast. I heard every word. And I said nothing because I had learned a long time ago that arguing with my mother in front of the family was a losing battle. He controlled the narrative. He always had. So I left. Quietly. And I went home and I called Grandma Maggie and I asked her if she wanted company the next morning. Yes, she said. I'd like that very much. Grandma Margaret died on December 8th. I was there. I was there because I had been there almost every day for the previous 2 weeks, ever since her condition had worsened. I had taken unpaid leave from work. I had slept on her couch 4 nights in a row. I had called her doctor, spoken to the hospice nurse, made sure her medications were correct, held her hand through the bad hours and made her tea during the good ones. She died at 4:22 p.m. on a Tuesday. The hospice nurse was in the next room. I was sitting in the chair beside her bed, holding her hand. She didn't say anything dramatic at the end. She didn't give me a final speech. She just squeezed my fingers one more time very lightly and then she was gone. I sat there for a long time afterward. I don't know how long. Maybe 20 minutes. Maybe an hour. The room was very quiet. Then I made the phone calls. I called the hospice office first. Then I called the funeral home. Grandma had already arranged everything through a pre-need plan, so there wasn't much to do. Then I called my mother. Karen answered on the second ring. I told her in a flat voice that Grandma had died. There was a pause on the other end. Then my mother said, "Oh, was anyone with her?" "Yes," I said. "I was." Another pause. "Hey, I'll call Diane and the boys. We'll figure out the funeral." That was the entire conversation. 12 seconds of silence, 2 questions and a plan to figure it out. "No, are you okay?" "No, I'm sorry." Nothing. The funeral was held 3 days later. Small. Quiet. 41 people attended, mostly Grandma's old neighbors and a few friends from her church. My mother wore a black dress she'd bought the morning of. Diane brought flowers that cost more than Grandma spent on groceries in a month. Patrick and Sean stood at the back and left early. I stood at the graveside alone after everyone else had drifted toward the parking lot. I stayed for 15 minutes. I didn't cry. I had done my crying in that quiet room on Tuesday afternoon alone with her hand in mine. At the funeral I just felt empty. Like someone had reached into my chest and removed something that had been keeping me steady for years. Grandma Maggie was the only person in my family who had ever made me feel like I mattered. And now she was gone. It was 5 days after the funeral, 10 days after her death, when the group chat exploded. My mother had gotten an email from Grandma's estate attorney, a man named Daniel Callahan. No relation to us despite the shared last name, just a coincidence that Grandma had always found amusing. The email was straightforward. A will reading had been scheduled. All named parties were required to attend. The date was set for the following Thursday at 2 p.m. What happened next in that group chat told me everything I needed to know about my family. Within an hour of my mother forwarding the email, Diane had sent a message. "Okay, so what do we think the house is worth?" I looked it up. Elm Creek Road properties are going for $580,000 to $640,000 right now. Patrick replied, plus whatever savings she had. Dad mentioned she had money somewhere. Sean, are we splitting it 4 ways or 3? Does Claire even count? My mother, we'll figure it out at the reading. Everyone just show up and be normal. Nobody mentioned Grandma. Not once. Not a single person in that thread said rest in peace, or I'm going to miss her, or anything close to it. It was a real estate transaction. That's what it was to them. I read every message. I didn't reply to any of it. I already knew what the will said. Not because I had snooped or manipulated or done anything my mother would later accuse me of doing. I knew because Grandma had told me herself. 6 months earlier on a quiet Sunday afternoon she had asked me to sit down. She had a cup of tea in her hand and a look on her face that I hadn't seen before. Serious, deliberate, like she had been thinking about something for a long time and had finally decided to say it out loud. "Claire," she said, "I want you to know something. About the will." I told her she didn't have to tell me. She waved her hand and said, I want to. It's important. She told me everything. The house. The investments. The savings account she'd kept separate from the checking account for 15 years. All of it. And she told me who it was going to. I know it's a lot, she said,